Let's take a little time to reveal the prehistoric stories that the earth once concealed. Mix them all together on this ancient land. It's time to spread some Palaeo Jam. Hello, welcome to another edition of Palaeo Jam. I'm your host, Michael Mills, and today we are celebrating Australian Dinosaur Day and other things, Australian dinosaur, and my special guest is the man kind of responsible in a way for getting us on this journey of Australian Dinosaur Day, Phil Hore. G'day, Phil. Welcome to Palaeo Jam.
Thanks for having me.
And
excited.
So let's go straight into Australian Dinosaur Day. Why this particular date? Why May the 7th?
So it all starts. Basically, I was curating the National Dinosaur Day, National Dinosaur Museum in Canberra, and we were trying to always link up with other museums. And there's not really a way of linking museums back then. Internet was only just getting going. So I kept trying to start a National Dinosaur Day, and I'd contact the Australian Museum, the big museums, and they'd all go, "That's a fantastic idea. It's a bit too late in the year to start it this year, so let's talk about it for next year." And that happened year after year after year. So then I decided, there's another way of doing this. And I kind of go, it's the evolution of humanity, which is like the society of the meek. I'll go to all the small museums and I'll get them involved. And then I'll invite the big museums to join us. And that worked. So I went to all the little museums and got like Canowindra, Age of Fishes, all these smaller museums, and kind of got everyone involved. And then went to the Australian Museum and place and went, why don't we do it on this date? And I chose that date because looking through the records, officially the first dinosaur bone was this dinosaur claw found down in Victoria, which was found on this date. So I went, well, that's got to be the date. Now, there might have been earlier dinosaurs, and I'm always a big supporter of Agrosaurus, which was found up in Cape York in Queensland. But officially, the Victorian claw is the first dinosaur fossil found in Australia. So let's make it that date.
Yeah, and it's interesting that process of getting the smaller folk to come on board and then saying to the other folk, the bigger folk, by the way, we're doing this thing. Do you want to come and play?
Yep, and it kind of takes the pressure off them as well, because obviously bigger museums, you don't have one person in charge. You have many people that they've got to pass things through. And it makes it so much easier for them to make the decision, well, let's just join. All we have to do is do something. We don't have any responsibility. Whereas before, they might have been thinking we were trying to get them to be part of some process, where we'd choose every year a dinosaur of the year or something like that. And the other flip side is, by me keeping control, I kept myself relevant. So I kept the National Dinosaur Museum in the conversation, and we could have a word in what we were going to celebrate and what we were going to do. So that's pretty much how it all came about. And so, for example, this year, I looked through the records and I discovered that one of Australia's more dem older dinosaurs, this is the centenary of that dinosaur. So this year we'll get to that.
Yeah. We'll absolutely talk about that. I suppose the really interesting thing, of course, is that they're while this particular day in this it's a theropod claw, right? Yeah, but we don't know what it necessarily is.
So have a preference? If you loved your BBC Walking with Dinosaurs, it was always the polar Allosaurus, and I remember watching Walking with Dinosaurs when it first aired and getting quite upset because the BBC talked all about Antarctica. They completely cut Australia out of the conversation. It was all Antarctica dinosaurs, and it was all the Australian Victorian dinosaurs. So there was always this suggestion it was Allosaurus, or even earlier than that, it was Megalosaurus, because if you found anything that was theropod back then, it was a Megalosaurus. And they're obviously all the British terms, because, Australia thought of itself as British, and we sent all of our fossils to England, to the London Natural History Museum. So our outlook was always what the English terms were. there was the claw, there was an ankle bone, and so especially the ankle bone, they're starting to lean towards maybe it's more the more famous current dinosaur found up at Winton, Australovenator, which I always trip on that one.
Australovenator, that's how I say it.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
Australovenator.
And if you haven't said it for a long time, you got to remember how to say it. So yeah, there's a suggestion it's either that or very closely related to that. But yeah, for a time it was Allosaurus, the polar Allosaurus.
Well, which is in itself a cool concept, but it's important to remember that this is Australia, and Australia was much further south, and this is where we see dinosaurs like Liaonosaura, which adapted for living in 3 months of night. And that's an interesting thing in terms of what it tells us or might tell us.
It does. It also kind of freaks me out that as much as we've been trying to split ourselves away from these things, over the last 15 years, it seems like we're kind of pushing ourselves back into the picture of the Northern Hemisphere dinosaurs when they start talking about, I think we found a Spinosaurus fossil. I think we found a Tyrannosauroid fossil. I think we found the oldest ceratopsian fossil, Leptoceratops. The Serendipitoceratops. So it's kind of strange that we've been trying to separate ourselves from everything for so long, and now we're starting to kind of push things back in and go, well, actually, we might have had some of these things.
Yeah, but it is. I mean, the Northern Hemisphere thing's interesting, too, isn't it? Because we go back to early colonial days, and apparently there's a tiger that used to live in Tasmania, except it's not. It's a marsupial with a stripy bum that looks a bit like a dog. That's not a tiger. It's something completely different.
The strange thing is back then they never said tiger. They always said either wolf or one like I think the Dutch were really pushing hyena, the Tasmanian hyena. So it's quite interesting to see where tiger entered the conversation. And I'm a bit like one of the governors of Tasmania. He's the guy who kind of started catching these things and sending them back to England. And he died on his way home, so he's been completely forgotten. Patterson. And Patterson's own history is just amazing. So that's the side I love, is getting into the history side of where a lot of these things come from. So that's what I've been working on for the last couple of years.
Awesome. All right, so Australian dinosaurs. Let's talk about why they matter and why they're important. I have a little thing I do as Professor Flint, the singing paleontologist, and the first album that he ever did, and it was rebooted this year with a new version that has got new songs and the old songs redone, and they're all Australian dinosaur songs in the new version. The old version had some megafauna and Ediacaran stuff, so I've taken them off, covered it with Australian dinosaur songs, including a Liaonosaurus song, and a song about like the footprints at Broome and stuff. And for me, the thought is very much that it's I suppose partly a response against that Northern Hemispheric thing, that we have our own stories here. We have our own dinosaurs. T-Rex is cool, don't get me wrong. Allosaurus is great. Megalosaurus, woo, brilliant. But hello, Australovenator. Wintona Titan, Liaonosaura. Hello to all of the cool Australian dinosaurs. So is that what it is for you? Is it partly that?
Partly. I will say in the last 10 years, it has changed quite a bit. But if you go back 20 years, nobody could name an Australian dinosaur. And a lot of these things were being found at the time when Australia was fighting for its own identity, because before the First World War, we were English. And even though we'd had federation and all the colonies had created the great country of Australia, we still really thought of ourselves as English. And it was only until the First World War in Gallipoli that an Australian identity really started to be forged. And it was around that time that all these, like the Cape Patterson claw was found. And there's that name again, Patterson. All these around that time. So we were finding our own prehistoric dinosaurs as well. So we could kind of push those as an Australian identity. Look, we've got these things as well. We're important. In the paleontology circles, we've got dinosaurs as well. So don't ignore us. But it's taken a long time because as you're well aware, it was all fragmentary. There weren't a lot, and what there wasn't much of it. And so it's taken a while to really find that identity of Australian dinosaurs and how they're different to the Northern Hemisphere dinosaurs, and which makes them special. And Australia loves being special.
Yeah, and the cool thing is that it's not just dinosaurs, of course, and the fossil heritage in this place is remarkable, from the the Ediacaran stuff, but even before that, the stromatolites and stuff.
Almost ridiculous, like the Wellington Caves, one of the greatest fossil discoveries ever. And there are actually quite a few where the dinosaur we're talking about today was found. I'm unearthing there were actually lots of amazing things found in that area that don't generally get talked about. So we do have National Fossil Day coming up, so I might have to mention those then.
We'll absolutely. Okay, so let's come back to Australian dinosaurs. I've got a favourite, and there is a Professor Flint song about it, and it is from Winton, and my favourite is Australovenator. I just love it. I just love this. I remember when I first heard about it and was talking with Dr. Scott Hocknall about it, and he was in Adelaide for Paleontology Week, and he referred to it, and I still do, as Jack the Slasher. And it's often referred to as Banjo because of a connection to Banjo Patterson. And Banjo's a nice name, but Jack the Slasher this is a cool dinosaur because you've got this.
It's a lot more descriptive.
You've got this medium-sized Megaraptorid, which is its own unique group in itself within theropods. And the possibility from some research last year is that I did an interview with Jack, and that this particular group may have originated in Australia, which is fascinating in itself, because it's like, our dinosaurs are cool. Songbirds come from here. All kinds of things come from here. But
as I just said, very possibly Tyrannosaurs and Ceratopsians started here too, because the oldest possible fossils of those are from Victoria.
So my vote for favourite Australian dinosaur is Australovenator. And I've been up to Lark Quarry, and there's some discussion as, was it a stampede? Was it not?
Oh, you're starting a controversy there.
I think I had somebody say to me once, because I've got a dinosaur stampede song, and they said, we can't sing that now. So the song doesn't mention Lark Quarry.
Yeah.
There were dinosaurs.
It must have happened somewhere at some point.
I reckon somewhere in the Mesozoic, a predator chased after some little dinosaurs because it was hungry. The song is therefore valid. But anyway, enough about me. Your favourite, and I know it's going to be like picking children, your favourite Australian dinosaur, and why?
So on a tour guide, if you're doing a tour, I do like the story of Lealanosaura and Tamimus, how they named Lealanosaura after the daughter, and then the son's like, I want a dinosaur too. And eventually they found another one and they called it Tamimus just to keep the family happy. So that's always a fun story to tell. As I kind of said at the beginning, my sympathies are towards Agrosaurus, the first dinosaur discovered in Australia, because it's been completely dismissed. It's thought to have been mislabeled. It was found around the 1840s, which is just incredible, by the HMS Fly. So it's one of these great scientific expeditions, and they were through Papua New Guinea, and I'm currently working at Rockhampton, and all the islands around Yeppoon up at Rockhampton were all charted by the HMS Fly. So it's this amazing scientific expedition, and they apparently at the top of Cape York discovered all these fossils and sent them back, and it was nearly 80 years later that they were scientifically described, and everybody kind of went, well, these look just like fossils from England, so we think that they've been mislabeled. And there's kind of evidence that that might be true, but there's also recent evidence that the location where they said they possibly found them has that type of rock there. The actual rock that these things were buried in, which is similar to the UK rock, is also found in Cape York, which means they may well have found them in Cape York. And so And I was talking to Dr. Scott Hucknall about that, and he's going, yeah, I've been kind of looking into this, and there is a possibility they found them there, which makes this the first dinosaur found in Australia. So it's just a great story to tell because it gets the British side of history, it gets the exploration side of history, it gets England involved, it gets controversy going on, and it shows you how science works. You have the best answer at the day. So the best answer at the time was this was found in Queensland. And then they came up with an idea going, that's probably not true. It looks like it's from England. So the story changed. Science isn't a stale fact. Science changes. And the more you learn, the more story you get to tell.
Yeah, it's about updating information and then about going, oh, we now know this. So it's using T-Rex as the classic example. We used to think it walked around upright. It's like, no, actually, that doesn't work.
And I always love the kangaroo stance. You see T-Rex hopping around like a kangaroo. That'd be hilarious.
No, its tail would snap and its legs would fall off if it walked around like that. And there would be tail, as well as footprints, there would be tail scrape marks, like you see with kangaroos, but there aren't. So
even simpler. I remember back when I was a kid, there was a Chinese dinosaur exhibit touring Australia. And they were taking over the football stadiums, the enclosed football stadiums. So you go in and see these Chinese dinosaurs. And they had, I think it was one of the big Chinese duckbill dinosaurs in the kangaroo stance. And I was standing next to the tail, and you could clearly see where they'd broken the bones to give the tail the bend so that they could create that kangaroo stance. And I was just sitting there going, you had to break the bones. It could not do that. It was just to make it look like that. You had to break the bones. They don't do that. So it is quite interesting, how our idea of dinosaurs have changed over the years.
And how values and cognitive biases can be so powerful that we can create that model with the broken tail and go, oh yeah, that's right, that's fine, that's what it is. Like, you broke its tail for it to stand like that. Clearly, it didn't stand like that. Australian dinosaurs. One of the really interesting things for me, and you kind of touched on it before about how things have changed a bit in the last few years in terms of, you walk into a classroom or a public event, and I'll often, as Prof. Flint, I'll often, if I'm doing a session on Australian dinosaurs, it'll be like, okay, give me the name of an Australian dinosaur. And, I still get T-Rex, I still get Megalodon, I still get crocodile. All of those are ultimately opportunities to say, actually, crocodiles, part of the Archosaur family, but, so you can, rather than just going, no, it's not that, it's not that. So I've learned to go, okay, this is an opportunity to help people understand where things all fit. But there are still sometimes sessions at schools and public events where I'll ask for an Australian dinosaur and we don't get to it. The most common one I get is Muttaburrasaurus.
That's because that was the dinosaur for the 90s and early 2000s. That was the one that, at National Dinosaur Museum, we had the life-size model of it, and we had some Muttaburrasaurus bones, and it seemed to be the one and because of Walking with Dinosaurs, Muttaburrasaurus was a big part of the Walking with Dinosaurs episode. So, and it was the one they talked about pretty much the most, as the herd Muttaburrasaurus coming, traveling from the north and migrating south for the winter and or the
Come
summer.
to Australia, they have one dinosaur, Muttaburrasaurus.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I think it's because the museums, a lot of museums had Muttaburrasaurus on display. The Queensland Museum, it was a dinosaur that they could talk about that wasn't. You didn't have to enter the T-Rex conversation. Oh, it's like T-Rex, because now all they hear is T-Rex.
Yeah. So, T-Rex. Did you mention T-Rex? All right. Yeah. Speaking of anniversaries, 100 years ago, in
Central Queensland,
Rheetosaurus. Is that how you say it? Rheeta? Because I've got a song where I call it Rheetosaurus, and I'm like, oh, it's too late.
I would say Rheetosaurus, and I've always heard it said Rheetosaurus, but that doesn't mean anything. because I was just watching a BBC documentary about Diplodocus,
Diplodocus.
or as the person on that said, and she'd been working with this dinosaur for a couple of years, she said, I can't even say it the way she said it. It was the weirdest way of saying it. And I'm like, oh my God, there's a third way of saying it. And that broke my brain.
Well,
so some dinosaurs, because we are talking about a dinosaur that the person who named it isn't around anymore, we're just going to go with the best. That's what it sounds like. That's the way you read it.
So Rhedosaurus is a Jurassic sauropod, which is
so
unique in
one
Australia
of the oldest.
Most of the stuff we find is Cretaceous.
Unique all over the world. Jurassic deposits are some of the rarest dinosaur deposits in the world, for the idea of Jurassic Park and all the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park not being from the Jurassic, or most of them. The Jurassic dinosaurs are actually quite rare all around the world. So to have a Jurassic deposit is quite amazing in Australia. And so, yes, Rhedosaurus. And it's also, biologically, it looks to be a very, very early form of the sauropods. It's got different things that other sauropods have. It's got more toes on the back foot more claws on the back foot than other sauropods had. It's got 4 compared to 3. So it seems to be a quite early version. And there's a suggestion it's closely related to an Asian one called Shuntosaurus. And that's a famous dinosaur because it had a bony club on the tail. And to think of a sauropod walking around with that long tail and a big bony club at the end, whacking things around, there's nothing more Australian than that, is there? Hitting things with a big stick.
You're not going to mess with that, are you? You're not going to.
No. So it's an amazing sounding dinosaur, and for a long time that was the most amount of bones we had for a dinosaur. They didn't have a complete one, but they had quite a few bones. They had some of the leg bones, some of the rib bones, some of the vertebra. And so it was an important dinosaur for a long time, but as you mentioned, Winton has completely eclipsed it with some of their discoveries recently. So it's kind of been forgotten about, but it's a pretty important dinosaur.
Yeah, I was at Winton a few years ago, and I was in their prep area. And it's a big shed, and for those that haven't been, it's this big shed, and you walk into the shed, and there are these shelves, and they're just these shells of these big bones in plaster, and I'm looking at them thinking, you've got to prep all those, plus you're still discovering new things. You could probably stop discovering things for a few years, and the stuff that's on these shelves would keep you busy for the next 10 years anyway. Just remarkable.
It is. And, you've got to feel sorry for the preparators. Like they're happy they've found something new, and they're like, oh, no, that's so much more work.
But it's such a cool place, as is, Eromanga, as is, all of the places that you can go now.
And I'm trying to get myself out to the Eromanga Museum, because that's probably Australia's most recent museum, and it sounds amazing. And I've seen photos, and I do a little blog about all the world's natural history museums, because I've either worked in them or visited them, and I found that there's no central resource to tell you, well, where do you see the original Archaeopteryx? Where do you see the original fossils of all the casts and things that we see in every museum? So I kind of highlight that stuff. And so just on that side of things, I'm desperate to get out there. I just think it sounds amazing. It looks amazing. And what an amazing area.
Yeah. And Lightning Ridge, the Opal Centre are building a new thing.
Yeah, that's getting close. And that's
all of that stuff. All right, coming back to
and I will say Mount Morgan. We're trying to get the dinosaur footprints reopened at Mount Morgan. So that's one of the things I'm doing while I'm here in Rockhampton is there's a massive dinosaur footprint trackway of a theropod in one of the mines, and they had a small collapse. You used to be able to go and see them. They had a small collapse, but so it was considered dangerous. But paleontology tourism is massive at the moment, and these are dinosaur footprints 20 minutes outside of Rockhampton, a major town with a major airport and major infrastructure. That's not Winton. This is easy to get to.
Yeah, and I've been to Capricorn Caves a couple of times
and Capricorn Caves. And there's there's whole things. In fact, last year was the centenary of a fossil site in Rockhampton, which the Queensland Museum asked me not to talk about because it's exposed and they didn't want it to be all taken. But, the oldest fossil snake, the first snake fossil and things were found at this location. So this whole area of Rockhampton is just surrounded by ancient prehistoric landscape.
Well, let me tell you about South Australia, actually.
Well, yeah. No,
Dinosaurs. We don't have dinosaurs, but we've got everything else in remarkable quantities in remarkable places.
But I would say you don't have dinosaurs yet.
Yeah, well, that's
just never know what's going to come
They would have
up.
lived here. It wasn't all under the Eromanga Sea. So, and there is Kakuru, there's a song about that on the Professor Flint album. So we've got opalized stuff like they do it.
Yeah.
Like the bridge. Okay, we've got about 4 minutes to go, Phil. 4 minutes to go.
Wow, we've been banging through that
as much as we possibly can. I want to touch on because I also find it one of the really interesting things is when some of the work that Steve Salisbury's done up at Broome in with the footprints in and around Broome, and there's some while we talk about maybe this Australian Dinosaur Day is the first theropod or it's the first discovery, and your favourite dinosaur that you mentioned is sooner than that. There's also some interesting stories and connections for Aboriginal Australians. And stories about the footprints in Broome that connect to songlines and things. And now these are not stories for us to talk about, but I think it's really interesting to acknowledge and realise that there's also a much longer and deeper connection in terms of how these things have been looked at.
Absolutely. And you can take it even a little bit simpler than that. Even a lot of the mythological creatures that, Europeans entering these locations for the first time discovered these, stories of these creatures like Thylacoleo or the Bunyip. And there were no living creatures that matched those descriptions. So we immediately just cast aside as, that's some mythological creature that never existed. And thanks to the fossil record, we're starting to pull all these mythologies apart and go, there might actually be some physical evidence to these because these people told their stories through their history through story or song.
Yeah, there's a great TED talk by Jacinta Quilmatri who talks about Yamoti, and Jacinta's Adnyamathanha woman, which is Flinders Ranges, north of here, and the suggestion is that Yamoti and Diprotodon are the same animal. And so you have different forms of knowledge informing us about an animal that the ancestors of Jacinta lived with this animal. So those things I think are really fascinating to think about. And what else might we learn?
It absolutely is. Yeah. And how it can be used as well. Like one of the things I'd always, because I train tour guides, and when you work at a dinosaur museum, you can't keep changing your displays. They're too big and they're too heavy. But you can change the way you present your displays. So one year it might be, we're talking about, predator and prey relationships. The next time might be, well, how do these relate to Indigenous stories all over the world? And were some, maybe not so much dinosaurs, except for the footprints, but some of the Ice Age animals were definitely part of these stories that were being told because they live with them. So yes, storytelling is an important side of paleontology that can kind of be forgotten just about how important it is.
Yeah, and it is how people ultimately engage with things. Fossils are stories. It's
how we remember.
Yeah, it's how we remember them.
I always tell people, you do not remember dry facts. You remember stories and you remember jokes.
I reckon
we're hardwired for that.
If you look at the bottom of my email, there's a little thing that says virtually those very words. We do not engage with facts or data, we engage with stories. Okay, there's not much time to go. What do you want to see, very quickly, where do you want Australian Dinosaur Day to go? What would it look like to you if it's at its best?
At its best, that people flock to their local museums and they go support their local museums and the efforts that they're doing to tell their local stories, as well as the larger story of Australia. So, if you're in Perth, you can go to the Western Australian museums. If you're in the Northern Territory, you go to there's lots of fantastic museums up there. There are museums wherever you go. Even if you're on like the Central Coast along New South Wales, go to the Whale Museum. They've actually got fossils on display there. So look for your local fossil area and learn your local history because, as I said, there's fossils all around you. You just got to know where to look and where to find them.
And on that note, thank you so much, Phil, for sharing your insights on Australian Dinosaur Day.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's time to spread some Paleo Jam.